Hi, my name is Tony, and today I will be presenting on the Seveso's disaster, a chemical disaster that happened in Seveso, Italy. So, the purpose of this presentation is I want to send the message about the health and environmental consequences that were brought by the chemical disasters and what people learned from that disaster and how it paved way for a legacy in the future and future legislations on safety of the health among citizens and chemical disasters. So before I get started, I'm just going to go over a brief overview of what I'll be discussing. So first I'll dive into the timeline of events and also going into depth of a diagram of areas that were most contaminated and where they were least contaminated, and then I'll be going into short-term and long-term impacts of the disaster, and that's when I'll be showing all my data and graphs, and then I'll be wrapping it up with the cleanup and the legacy it had on present-day Seveso. So, to briefly discuss the timeline of events, the disaster in Seveso, it happened in 1976. It was near another country in Italy called Meta, and the company that had the chemical plant was called ICMESA, and this particular industry, worked with pharmaceutical and cosmetic industries on one early morning when the crew was off work, um, they weren't very aware of what was happening at that time, but there was a loud pinging noise from the safety disc, and the safety disc at that time was rupturing, and there was this white gas that was spewing out of the building. No one really knew what was happening at that point, but little did anyone know there was some form of chemical coming out called tetrachlorobenzopdioxin, which, is harmful to the health of animals, vegetation, and animals, and humans. And, the following days, people began to see more than usual uh, number of deaths of rabbits in the area and birds, and also just from around the area with trees and everything was dying, and children, they were suffering from skin lesions, and it was very odd at that time. And that's when they noticed that there was a problem going on. So then a special emergency office was implemented, and they took samples from the soil, and that's where they found the chemical p-dioxin, and that's when it was becoming a problem, so they began evacuation zones. Going into depth on the zones that were created for evacuation, it was rated off of where the area where it was highly contaminated to the lowest contamination zone. So zone A was the highly exposed area, and that particular area, every single business and people had to flee from their houses because of how strong it was, of the impacts with their health and everything that was going on. So now there's many types of effects that happened as a result of the chemical disaster. One being environmental, as I discussed before, there was a lot of animal deaths. Also, it was noted that there was a lot of effects on plants, and the chemical showed up in cow's milk as well. For health, it was noted in studies that children had decline immune functions due to the dioxin exposure, and also kidney function. And then chloracne is another term for the skin lesions that were popping up due to the dioxin. With pregnancy, it was noted that there was abnormalities happening during pregnancy, and this potentially could be due to the exposure to the dioxin, and also a change in the sex ratio, which I found very interesting. And it may be the reason may be because of hormonal changes that happened with the effect of this chemical. And long term, it didn't pop up right away, but in the later years, they have done studies of associating this disaster with causing, indirectly diabetes, which is interesting to me because it's chronic, not very, contagious. It's not contagious at all. Cardiovascular diseases and cancers, and mostly, respiratory issues, and everything is the result of the chemical dioxin. Now I'll be discussing the plasma TCDD levels, otherwise known as dioxin levels, and each of the contamination zones. It makes sense because zone A had the highest levels, actually the same as non-contaminated areas, and zone B, medium exposure, had the least, and our zone, which is the minimal exposure, had the second to least contamination. And then I go further into the types of effects that were mostly affected by the Seveso accident, specifically in Zone A, and this is based off mortality rates. And it is shown that in Zone A, the most contaminated area, circulatory diseases were the most noted, and this is based off a study by Bertazzi. And then you can see that there's other categories too, and this is, this happened, this study happened right after the event, and they took note of some participants and collected data on what disease happened the most amongst everyone. This line graph, which was extracted from a study by Bassarelli, shows how dioxin affected neonatal BTSH levels, and this correlates to thyroid function amongst fetuses in the womb, and it has been noted by this graph that there is an altered change in thyroid function due to the dioxin chemical. With the cleanup of the Seveso disaster, the first priority that happened was relocating everyone from Zone A, the most contaminated area, because it really wasn't healthy to live there. There was rabbits dying, and this type of chemical, like I said before, caused all those health effects, and also removal of vegetation and soil that had the contaminated dioxin. And the nuclear industry, they completely dismantled the chemical plant. And this all paved way for learning a lesson. And on today, there is a regulation in the UK in 1999 that was implemented to reassure that people are safe and healthy with industrial management and development. So basically, yeah, it paves the way for tying the health of citizens and industrial development together. So that is my presentation. Thank you.